Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon, watching the stars through the main viewport when the impossible happened. Communications Officer Ryan Parker turned from his station with wide eyes and said the words that would change everything for humanity. An alien message had just arrived, and it was meant for them. The bridge fell silent as Ryan played the transmission. Strange sounds filled the air like music mixed with mathematics, and somehow Jake understood every word. The message spoke of a galactic council and an invitation for humanity to join something much larger than they had ever imagined. But there was something else in the message that made Jake's stomach turn cold. They called humans the dangerous ones. Drive Lisa Brooks rushed to the bridge as soon as she heard the news. She was the ship's expert on life forms, and her job was to study anything they might find in space. Now she had the biggest discovery in human history sitting in their computer systems. She played the message again and again while her instruments tried to make sense of how the aliens were able to speak directly into human minds. Lisa found patterns in the alien speech that worried her. Hidden beneath the formal invitation were fragments of other conversations. The aliens were afraid of something about humans, but they would not say what. She heard references to reality breakers and species that should not exist. Every time she tried to understand more, the signals became unclear, as if someone was trying to hide the truth. Ryan Parker worked through the night trying to intercept more alien communications. His equipment was designed to pick up human radio signals, but somehow it was also catching alien chatter from across the galaxy. What he found made him wish he had never learned to listen. The aliens were talking about humans like they were some kind of threat that needed to be dealt with carefully. Chief Engineer Maria Santos gathered her team to study the alien technology that made the message possible. The transmission had somehow traveled faster than light and reached into their minds without any receivers or translators. This was science beyond anything humans had ever seen. She argued that accepting the invitation was worth any risk because what they could learn would advance humanity by thousands of years. Security Chief Alex Turner disagreed completely. He had spent his career protecting human ships from pirates and hostile forces. Every instinct he had developed told him this was a trap. The aliens knew where Earth was located, and they had technology that humans could not understand or defend against. Going to meet them would put humanity at their mercy. The senior staff met in the conference room, where arguments flew back and forth for hours. Drive Brooks explained that the alien languages seemed designed for species that thought in completely different ways than humans. Some aliens appeared to communicate through mathematics, while others shared emotions directly. Each species seemed to have one way of thinking that dominated everything else they did. Lisa had noticed something strange about how the aliens described themselves. Each species mentioned only one special ability or strength. The Kefir were described as perfect calculators who could solve any mathematical problem. The Zephyrians were called empathic healers who could feel and cure any emotional pain. The Grimm were introduced as ultimate warriors who had never lost a battle. This pattern bothered Lisa because humans were not like that at all. Humans could do many things reasonably well, but they were not the absolute best at any single thing. She wondered if this was why the aliens called them dangerous. Maybe being average at everything was actually threatening to species that were perfect at only one thing. Jake Morrison listened to all the arguments and studied the data until his head hurt. The decision he made would affect not just his crew but all of humanity. If he refused the invitation, the aliens might decide humans were too hostile to be allowed to exist. If he accepted, they might be walking into a trap that would destroy the human race. The captain thought about the explorers who had come before him and the risks they had taken to expand human knowledge. Every great discovery had required someone to step into the unknown despite the dangers. He made his choice with the weight of human history on his shoulders. Jake announced that they would accept the alien invitation, but they would not go unprepared. He ordered the crew to study every piece of alien communication they could intercept and to prepare for any possible threat. If this was humanity's first step into a larger universe, then they would take that step with their eyes open and their defenses ready. The message went out to the Galactic Council accepting their invitation. Within hours, a reply arrived with coordinates for a meeting place called Nexus Station. The aliens seemed pleased that humans had agreed to come, but there was still something hidden in their communications that suggested this meeting would be far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. As the horizon changed course toward its date with destiny, Jake Morrison stood again at his viewport and wondered what the aliens really saw when they looked at humans. Soon he would find out, and the answer would determine whether humanity had a future among the stars. The Nexus Station hung in space like a metal city built around a dying star. Ambassador Helen Carter pressed her face against the transport window as they approached and tried to count the different types of ships docked at the massive structure. Each vessel looked completely different from the others, as if they had been built by species that could not even imagine how the others might think. Dr. Peter Hayes sat beside Helen, studying the psychological profiles he had prepared for their first meeting with alien minds. He was humanity's expert on behavior and thought patterns, but everything he knew was based on human experience. Today he would meet beings whose minds worked in ways that might be completely impossible for humans to understand. The docking process took 3 hours as alien traffic controllers guided their ship through a maze of structures that seemed to shift and change as they watched. Helen realized that the station was not just big, but was actually growing and rebuilding itself constantly to accommodate the needs of different species who might require completely different environments. Their first meeting took place in a chamber that hurt to look at directly. The walls seemed to bend in directions that should not exist, while the floor felt solid under their feet but appeared to be made of flowing liquid. Helen forced herself to focus on the 12 alien representatives who waited for them around a table that was somehow both circular and square at the same time. Counselor Vexthal of the Kefir looked like a walking equation made of crystal and light. When it spoke, numbers and formulas appeared in the air around its head, as if mathematics was its natural language. It explained that humans were here to be tested so the council could determine what role they might play in galactic civilization. The Zephyrian representative was a being of pure emotion that made everyone in the room feel whatever it was feeling. Helen found herself overwhelmed by waves of curiosity mixed with fear and something else that might have been pity. The creature seemed genuinely sorry for humans, though it would not explain why. A grim warrior stood at attention throughout the meeting like a statue carved from black metal and rage. It never spoke, but Helen could feel violence radiating from it like heat from a fire. This was a being bred for war who knew nothing but conflict and victory. Dr. Hayes watched the interactions carefully and began to see a pattern that disturbed him greatly. Each alien species seemed to have developed along a single line of evolution until they became perfect at one thing and completely unable to do anything else. The Kefir could solve any problem through mathematics, but they could not understand art or emotion. The Zephyrians felt everything, but could not think logically about what they felt. The testing began immediately with challenges designed to measure human capabilities. In different areas, Helen was given a diplomatic puzzle that required her to negotiate peace between species that communicated through colors and scents. She solved it by finding common ground that none of the aliens had considered possible. Peter faced a psychological evaluation administered by a species that experienced reality through shared dreams. He was supposed to fail because humans were individuals who could not join a group mind. Instead, he found a way to communicate with the dream beings while maintaining his own identity, something they insisted was impossible. Combat specialist Kate Phillips was matched against training programs designed by the greatest warrior races in the galaxy. She was expected to choose one fighting style and master it completely. Instead, she combined techniques from multiple disciplines, creating strategies that confused the computer systems because they violated the basic rules of how combat was supposed to work. Engineer Danny Coleman was presented with a construction project that required perfect mathematical precision according to Kefir standards. He completed it using intuition and approximations that should have resulted in structural failure. When the building not only stood, but actually improved on the original design, the Kefir representatives began making sounds that might have been mechanical distress. The aliens observed each test with growing confusion and alarm. They had expected humans to excel in one area while failing completely in others, just like every species they had encountered. Instead, humans performed reasonably well at everything, while refusing to fit into any of the categories that defined galactic civilization. Biologist Amy Roberts was asked to solve a problem in genetic engineering that had puzzled the galaxy's greatest scientific minds for centuries. Each previous attempt had failed because the researchers could only approach the problem from their species' single perspective. Amy found 17 different solutions by switching between multiple ways of thinking. During the same experiment, the alien observers began holding private discussions in languages that sounded like panic mixed with mathematical equations. Helen caught fragments of their conversations that suggested they were not just confused by human performance, but actually frightened by it. Drive Hayes realized that the aliens were not testing humans to find their place in galactic society. They were trying to figure out if humans were dangerous enough to require elimination. Every species in the galaxy had limitations that made them predictable and manageable. Warriors could not innovate. Thinkers could not fight. Artists could not calculate. Humans appeared to have no such limitations, which made them a threat to the careful balance that kept galactic civilization stable. Helen understood that they were not here as guests or potential members. They were here as specimens being evaluated for containment or destruction. The final test of the day involved a simulation where humans had to work with alien team members to solve a crisis. The aliens expected humans to either try to dominate the group or to submit completely to alien authority. Instead, the humans adapted their behavior to work effectively with each different species, while maintaining their own decision-making ability. When the session ended, the alien counselors retreated to discuss what they had witnessed. Helen could hear them through the thin walls arguing in a dozen different languages about what to do with a species that broke every rule they understood about how intelligent life was supposed to develop and behave. The testing chambers on Nexus Station became increasingly strange as the alien evaluation of humanity continued. Combat specialist Kate Phillips found herself standing in an arena that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once while facing a grim warrior whose very presence made the air around him vibrate with barely controlled violence. The Grim had been bred for war across thousands of generations, until they became perfect killing machines who knew only victory and defeat. This particular warrior had never lost a battle and expected to crush the human female, quickly to prove that humans were not the dangerous species the Council feared. Kate studied her opponent and saw exactly what she was dealing with. The Grim was stronger, faster, and more experienced than any human could ever be. His fighting style was flawless and had been refined through countless battles against every type of enemy the galaxy could produce. If she tried to fight him using his rules, she would lose within seconds. So she decided not to follow his rules at all. When the battle began, the Grim charged forward with a roar that shattered the crystal walls around the arena. Kate ran away. The warrior species had no experience with retreat as a tactical choice, and wasted precious seconds trying to understand why his opponent was not meeting his attack. Kate used those seconds to study the arena and plan her strategy. She noticed that the dimensional shifting walls could be triggered by impact, and that the artificial gravity changed direction in different parts of the space. The Grim had been so focused on direct combat that he had not even noticed these environmental factors. The warrior finally caught up to Kate and swung his massive weapon in an arc that should have cut her in half. She was not there when it arrived. Instead, she was behind him, using the momentum from his own attack to send him stumbling into a wall that immediately shifted him into a different dimensional plane. The watching aliens made sounds of shock and confusion. Warriors were supposed to fight with honor, using strength and skill to defeat their enemies. What Kate was doing looked like cheating to species that could only think in terms of their single specialized approach to problems. Kate spent the next 20 minutes demonstrating that humans did not always solve problems the way other species expected. She used deception to make the Grim attack empty air. She employed the arena's own systems against him, turning his environment into a weapon he could not defend against. When she finally defeated him, it was not through superior combat ability, but through adaptability. that his warrior mind could not comprehend. Meanwhile, engineer Danny Coleman faced a different challenge in the HFY testing facility. The mathematical beings had created a logic puzzle that should have only one correct solution, based on universal constants and proven theorems. Danny was expected to either solve it correctly through pure calculation, or fail completely like most non-mathematical species. Instead, Danny looked at the problem from angles that the HFY had never considered. He applied intuitive leaps that had no mathematical basis, but somehow led to valid solutions. When he presented not one, but 7 different correct answers, the HFY began arguing among themselves in equations that appeared as burning symbols in the air. The crystalline beings had built their entire civilization on the belief that mathematics was the only true language and that every problem had exactly one perfect solution. Danny's multiple solutions violated their fundamental understanding of reality and suggested that their mathematical perfection might not be as complete as they believed. Biologist Amy Roberts was working in a laboratory designed by species that approached science through pure logic and observation. She was presented with a biological sample that had resisted analysis by the galaxy's greatest scientific minds for over 3 centuries. Each species had applied their specialized knowledge and failed to unlock its secrets. Amy examined the sample using human scientific methods that combined observation with imagination, hypothesis testing with creative speculation. She approached the problem from biological, chemical, and even artistic perspectives, switching between different ways of thinking as the situation required. Her breakthrough came when she realized that previous researchers had been limited by their species' single approach to understanding. The sample was not just a biological entity, but also a mathematical construct and an emotional expression created by beings who thought in all 3 modes simultaneously. When Amy announced her discovery, the alien scientists responded with what could only be described as panic. She had not only solved their ancient mystery, but had done so using methods that violated their basic assumptions about how research should be conducted. Diplomat Henry Walsh was observing these tests while trying to intercept alien communications when he overheard a conversation that chilled him to his core. 2 alien counselors were discussing whether humans were evolutionarily defective or impossibly dangerous, and neither option seemed to lead to a positive outcome for humanity. The aliens had built their civilization on the principle that every species had limitations that made them predictable and manageable. The HFY could not fight effectively because their mathematical minds could not process the chaos of battle. The Grimm could not innovate because their warrior nature rejected anything that was not direct confrontation. These limitations were not seen as weaknesses, but as necessary features that maintained galactic stability. Each species filled specific roles and could not threaten the others because their specialization prevented them from competing outside their designated areas. Humans appeared to have no such limitations, which made them a threat to everything. The aliens understood about how intelligent life was supposed to function. A species that could adapt and excel in any field might eventually dominate or destroy galactic civilization simply through their unpredictable nature. Drive Peter Hayes had been studying the alien psychology and reached a disturbing conclusion. The Galactic Council was not evaluating humans for membership, but trying to determine if humanity needed to be contained or eliminated before they could upset the careful balance that kept different species from destroying each other. The tests were not measuring human capabilities but human limitations. The aliens needed to find weaknesses they could exploit or boundaries they could use to keep humanity from becoming a destabilizing force in their ordered universe. As the day progressed, it became clear that every human success in the tests was actually making their situation more dangerous. Each demonstration of adaptability and creativity was further proof that humans did not fit into the categories that made galactic civilization possible. The aliens watched in growing horror as humans consistently broke their fundamental assumptions about how intelligent species should behave and what limitations they should possess. The meeting room deep within Nexus Station was designed to be invisible to most scanning equipment and undetectable to casual observation. Ambassador Helen Carter followed the strange floating lights that had appeared outside her Corridors at midnight through corridors that seemed to exist between the official sections of the station. Counselor Zeremoth of the Zephyrians waited in the shadows of the hidden chamber. The empathic being radiated fear and desperation so strongly that Helen could feel it pressing against her mind like a physical weight. Something terrible was happening, and this alien was risking everything to warn humanity about it. Helen had learned to recognize the emotional signatures of different alien species. During her time on the station, the Zephyrians were natural healers who felt the pain and joy of everyone around them. For one of them to be this afraid meant that something was threatening not just humans, but the emotional stability of the entire galactic community. Zeremoth spoke in whispers that bypassed normal hearing and appeared directly in Helen's mind. The Galactic Council was not evaluating humans for membership as they had claimed. Instead, they were trying to determine whether humanity needed to be contained in a remote part of the galaxy or eliminated entirely as a threat to galactic civilization. The truth was worse than Helen had feared. Every alien species had achieved interstellar travel and joined galactic society by becoming perfect at one specific ability, while losing the capacity to do anything else well. The specialization was not an accident, but a requirement for membership in their community. The Kethver had become pure mathematicians who could solve any equation, but could not understand art, emotion, or creativity. The Grimm had evolved into perfect warriors who could win any battle, but could not innovate, adapt, or think beyond combat. The Zephyrians were empathic healers who could cure any mental suffering, but could not make logical decisions or defend themselves. Each species filled a specific role in galactic civilization, and their limitations prevented them from threatening or competing with the others. The mathematicians needed the warriors for protection. The warriors needed the healers for emotional stability. The healers needed the mathematicians for logical guidance. The system had maintained peace and stability for millions of years. Humans violated every principle that made this system possible. They could fight reasonably well without being pure warriors. They could think logically without being limited to mathematics. They could feel empathy without losing their ability to make hard decisions. Their adaptability made them unpredictable, and their lack of limitations made them potentially dangerous to everyone. Zeremoth explained that some factions within the Council were already preparing military fleets because they believed humans would eventually dominate galactic civilization through their ability to excel in any field they chose to pursue. Other factions wanted to isolate humanity in a remote corner of the galaxy, where they could not interfere with the established order. Officer Nicole Green had been monitoring alien communications from her position in the human quarters when she intercepted transmissions that confirmed the Zephyrians' warnings. Multiple alien species were discussing humanity as an existential threat that needed to be dealt with before they could establish a permanent presence in galactic space. The intercepted conversations revealed the depth of alien fear about human capabilities. They spoke of humans as reality breakers who violated the natural order by refusing to accept the limitations that defined every other intelligent species. Some aliens wondered if humans were the result of artificial evolution or genetic manipulation by some unknown cosmic force. Helen realized that humanity was not just fighting for membership in galactic civilization, but for their right to exist at all. The aliens saw human adaptability not as a strength, but as a fundamental threat to everything they had built over millions of years of careful specialization and cooperation. The ambassador understood now why the tests had become increasingly difficult and strange. The aliens were not measuring human capabilities, but trying to find the breaking point where humans would be forced to specialize like every other species. They needed to prove that humans had limitations that could be exploited to make them manageable. Drive Peter Hayes had reached similar conclusions through his psychological analysis of alien behavior patterns. Every species they had encountered showed signs of evolutionary trauma from the process of becoming hyper-specialized. They had sacrificed most of their natural abilities to become perfect at one specific function. This sacrifice was so fundamental to their identity that they could not imagine a species that had not made similar choices. Humans represented something impossible in their worldview. and species that challenged fundamental beliefs were historically dealt with through isolation or elimination. Zeramuth warned Helen that time was running out. The council would soon vote on what to do about humanity, and the factions supporting elimination were gaining support. With each demonstration of human adaptability, every success in the tests was being used as evidence that humans were too dangerous to be allowed to survive. The Zephyrian offered to help humanity escape before the council could act, but Helen knew that running would only confirm alien fears about human unpredictability. If humanity fled now, they would spend the rest of their existence hiding from galactic civilization, while being hunted by species with technology far beyond anything humans could develop. Instead, Helen made a decision that would determine the future of her species. She asked Zeramuth to arrange a final test where humans could prove that their adaptability was not a threat, but actually the solution to problems that had plagued the galaxy for centuries. The empathic alien was confused by this request because every other species that had faced elimination by the council had either submitted to specialization or been destroyed. No species had ever voluntarily accepted an additional test when they were already facing extinction. Helen explained that humans had survived and thrived on Earth by solving problems that seemed impossible, rather than by avoiding challenges that seemed dangerous. If the galaxy had problems that required adaptability to solve, then humanity would prove their worth by solving them. Zeramuth agreed to help arrange this final test while warning Helen that failure would result in immediate military action against Earth and every human settlement in space. The stakes could not be higher, and there would be no second chances if humanity could not prove that their dangerous adaptability was actually a gift that galactic civilization desperately needed. The Grand Assembly Hall of Nexus Station filled with representatives from every species in the Galactic Council as news spread that humanity had requested one final test. The massive chamber could hold thousands of beings, and today it was packed with creatures that defied human imagination, all waiting to see if the dangerous species called humans could prove they deserved to exist. Ambassador Helen Carter stood at the center of the hall, surrounded by alien minds that radiated fear, curiosity, and barely controlled hostility. She knew that this was humanity's last chance to avoid extinction, and the weight of her entire species rested on what happened in the next few hours. Counselor Vexthal of the Kethver announced the challenge that would determine humanity's fate. The Void Plague had returned to threaten galactic civilization. After lying dormant for 3 centuries, the space-borne phenomenon destroyed entire star systems by consuming matter and energy, while growing larger and more destructive with each system it devoured. The mathematical beings had calculated that the plague would reach the galactic core within 50 standard years if it continued on its current path. When it arrived, it would consume the central systems that powered galactic civilization and cause the collapse of everything intelligent species had built over millions of years. Every specialized species had attempted to solve the Void Plague crisis using their particular strengths and abilities. The Kethver had created mathematical models that proved the plague should not be able to exist. According to known physics, their calculations were perfect, but the plague continued to ignore their mathematical certainties. The Grim Warrior clans had assembled the greatest military force in galactic history and attacked the plague directly. Their fleets were absorbed into the growing void without slowing it down at all. Pure violence and combat prowess were useless against an enemy that existed beyond the normal rules of warfare. The Zephyrian healers had attempted to commune with the plague, believing it might be a living entity in pain that could be cured through empathic connection. The few who survived the attempt returned with minds shattered by contact with something so alien that it drove them to madness. Species after species had tried their specialized approaches and failed completely. The plague continued its slow but inevitable advance toward the heart of galactic civilization, while the council argued about evacuation plans and desperate last stands that everyone knew would be futile. Scientists Carol Peterson and Frank Martinez led the human research team that would either save the galaxy or prove that humanity deserved the extinction that awaited them. They had studied every previous attempt to understand the Void Plague and found something that no specialized species had been able to see. Each alien approach had failed because it relied on a single method of understanding and attack. The HFY saw the plague as a mathematical problem to be solved through calculation. The Grimm treated it as an enemy to be destroyed through superior force. The Zephyrians believed it was a mind to be healed through emotional connection. Carol realized that all three approaches might be partially correct, but none was complete by itself. The plague might be simultaneously a mathematical anomaly, a hostile force, and a damaged consciousness that required different types of response applied at the same time. Working with engineer Bobby Clark and pilot Sandra Lee, the human team developed a plan that violated every principle of specialized thinking that governed galactic civilization. Instead of choosing one approach, they decided to combine elements from every failed attempt into a single coordinated response. The aliens watched in amazement as humans began coordinating techniques that their specialized minds considered completely incompatible. Mathematical precision from the HFY was combined with aggressive tactics from the Grimm, while empathic healing from the Zephyrians provided the emotional framework to hold everything together. Frank Martinez worked with HFY mathematicians to create equations that described the plague's behavior, while simultaneously developing battle plans with Grimm warriors for direct engagement. Carol Peterson collaborated with Zephyrian healers to understand the plague's possible consciousness, while building weapons designed to exploit its mathematical weaknesses. The alien observers were confused and disturbed by this multifaceted approach because their specialized minds could not comprehend how different methodologies could be used together. Warriors could not understand mathematics. Mathematicians could not grasp empathy. Healers could not think in terms of warfare. Humans moved easily between all these different approaches, treating them not as contradictory philosophies, but as complementary tools that could be combined to create solutions none could achieve alone. This adaptability that had made them seem dangerous now became their greatest strength. The plan they developed required perfect coordination between all three alien approaches applied simultaneously. Two different aspects of the plague. HFY calculations would predict its movement patterns. Grimm warriors would engage it directly at predetermined points. Zephyrian healers would attempt to communicate with any consciousness within the void. Most importantly, humans would coordinate between all three groups, translating mathematical concepts into military tactics while converting empathic insights into strategic advantages. Only a species that could think in multiple ways simultaneously could make such a complex plan work. When the combined fleet engaged the void plague, the results exceeded everyone's expectations. The mathematical predictions allowed precise targeting of vulnerable points. The military assault disrupted the plague's feeding patterns. The empathic contact revealed that the void was not malevolent, but confused and lost. The plague responded to the coordinated approach in ways that amazed every observer. Instead of consuming the attacking forces, it began to change and stabilize, as if the multifaceted response had given it something it desperately needed. Within hours, the advancing edge of the void plague stopped moving toward the galactic core. Within days, it began to contract and transform into something that looked more like a natural phenomenon than a destructive force. The crisis that had threatened galactic civilization for centuries was resolved through human adaptability combined with alien expertise. The Grand Assembly Hall erupted in sounds that might have been celebration, relief, or simply amazement that the impossible had actually happened. For the first time in millions of years, a problem that had resisted specialized solutions had been solved through the kind of adaptive thinking that only humans seemed capable of providing. 1 year after the Void Plague crisis, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted when humanity first arrived at Nexus Station. The rigid divisions between specialized species had begun to blur as aliens discovered they could accomplish far more by working with humans who could bridge the gaps between their different ways of thinking. On the mining world Kepler-4 for to be human coordinator Steve Johnson sat in a meeting room that would have been impossible before first contact. Grimm warriors and HFY analysts worked at the same table discussing extraction strategies that combined mathematical precision with battlefield tactics in ways that neither species could have imagined alone. The Grimm had always approached mining like warfare using brute force to break through obstacles, and overwhelming firepower to solve any problem. The Kefir preferred elegant mathematical solutions that required minimal energy and maximum efficiency. Both methods worked, but neither was optimal for the complex geological challenges they faced. Steve served as a translator between the warrior mindset and the mathematical approach, helping each species understand concepts that their specialized evolution had made impossible for them to grasp independently. When the warriors wanted to blast through a difficult rock formation, he helped the mathematicians explain why precision drilling would be more effective. When the analysts calculated that a tunnel should be structurally sound, he helped the warriors see potential combat applications for the same engineering principles. The results exceeded everyone's expectations as mining operations that had been limited by single-species thinking suddenly became far more efficient and profitable. The aliens began to understand that their limitations were not strengths, but obstacles that could be overcome through cooperation with beings who could think in multiple ways simultaneously. Rachel Turner had established the first interspecies research facility on a space station that orbited a neutron star. Her laboratory brought together scientists from dozens of different species to work on problems that had resisted solution for centuries. What made her facility unique was not the advanced equipment, but Rachel's ability to help alien researchers understand each other's completely different approaches to science. The breakthrough discoveries came not from any single species, but from combinations of alien methodologies that had never been tried before. Zephyrian empathic techniques helped Kefir mathematicians understand the emotional components of consciousness. Grim tactical thinking provided new frameworks for approaching biological warfare against diseases. Human adaptability made it possible to combine approaches that seemed mutually exclusive. Rachel realized that every major scientific advance in the past year had come from teams that included humans as coordinators and translators between alien specialists. The galaxy's greatest scientific minds had been limited not by lack of intelligence, but by their inability to think outside their evolutionary specializations. Captain Jake Morrison now served as an official liaison between humanity and the Galactic Council. His ship, the HFY Horizon, had become a mobile embassy that traveled between worlds, helping to solve disputes and crises that required adaptive thinking to resolve. On his latest mission, Jake had mediated a conflict between the artistic Velter species and the industrial Corvan Empire. The Velter created beautiful sculptures that the Corvan wanted to mass-produce for galactic distribution. Neither species could understand the other's perspective because their evolutionary paths had led them to completely different values and priorities. Jake helped both sides see that art and industry could work together instead of competing against each other. The Velter gained access to technologies that let them create larger and more complex works, while the Corvan learned to appreciate beauty in ways their purely practical mindset had never allowed them to experience. This pattern repeated itself across the galaxy as humans found themselves in demand as mediators, interpreters, and problem solvers. Their dangerous adaptability had become the glue that held an increasingly cooperative galactic civilization together. The change was most visible on Nexus Station itself, where the rigid separation between species areas had given way to mixed districts where aliens worked and lived together with human coordinators, helping them navigate their differences. The station had grown larger and more complex as new forms of cooperation became possible. Ambassador Helen Carter reflected on how much had changed since that first terrifying meeting with the Galactic Council. The aliens who had once seen humanity as a threat now competed to have humans assigned to their projects and colonies. What had seemed like humanity's greatest weakness turned out to be their most valuable gift to galactic civilization. The fear that humans might dominate other species had proven unfounded because human adaptability made them natural collaborators rather than conquerors. They succeeded by helping others achieve their potential rather than by replacing them with human alternatives. Helen remembered the conversation with Counselor Zaramith that had revealed the truth about alien fears and limitations. The Zephyrian healer had recently visited Earth, where she experienced something that her species had thought impossible. For the first time in her life she had made logical decisions, while maintaining her empathic abilities, because human teachers had shown her that thinking and feeling did not have to be mutually exclusive. Similar transformations were happening throughout the galaxy as aliens discovered they could develop capabilities beyond their original specializations by working with humans who demonstrated that limitations were often self-imposed rather than evolutionary necessities. The Galactic Council had voted unanimously to grant humanity full membership with a special role as interspecies coordinators and problem solvers. What the aliens finally understood was that they saw in humans not a single defining trait, like their own species possessed, but something far more valuable and rare. When aliens looked at humans, they saw infinite possibility in a universe that had become trapped by infinite specialization. They saw beings who could grow and change and help others do the same. They saw a species that treated differences as opportunities for cooperation, rather than barriers to understanding. Most importantly, they saw hope that their rigid specialized civilization could learn to become something greater than the sum of its parts, just as humans demonstrated every day that individuals could be more than their limitations suggested. The galaxy had discovered that its greatest strength was not the perfection of its individual species, but the potential for growth and change that came from beings who refused to accept that anything was impossible.